An unknown shadow skulks around the edge of the light sources, creeping slowly towards the target. The heavy rain pouring down makes the target unable to hear anyone or anything sneaking up on him. A few footsteps later, and the shadowy finger sinks the blade into the victim's heart, reaching around with a dagger. The murderer leans towards the ear of their victim and keeps close for a moment, muttering something, as if they knew each other for a lifetime. After a long few seconds, the body falls to the ground and the shadow disappears into the night again. Seems pretty dark, no? A little bit edgy, as you could say. But let's see if we can boost this up a little bit. Take 2. An unknown shadow skulks around the edge of the light sources, creeping slowly towards the target they always knew they would kill. The heavy rain pouring down prevents the target from hearing any sound or person sneaking up on them, making excellent background to the foul murder about to happen. A few fast footsteps later, the shadowy figure twirls the serrated blade and sinks it into the heart. The murderer leans towards the ear of the victim, almost as if they knew each other, saying, "I've been waiting for this since the blood vow." After a few seconds, the body falls to the ground and the shadow disappears into the night, laughing maniacally. So now we've done a very good job at making this story very shit. A lot of people would have trouble slugging through the rest of the story and deeming it dark and broody and above all very, very edgy. As you may have guessed from the stories and the title, of course, we're gonna talk about the subjects I've always been interested in, and it's called edge. Everyone has their own version of what they think is edgy, and therefore there isn't really a true defining explanation of what it actually is. However, I think we can come to a couple of conclusions about what edge entails and how it differs from dark themes, and more importantly, how we use this knowledge in our games. So first of all, what exactly is edge? And when I think of edge, I think of the brooding, the silent type, the person with hair covering their eyes and having an extreme bloodlust, and the only thing darker than a backstory is their cold, dead heart. But when you take a step back and go to the literal meaning, edge is the outer part of stuff, of the border, the boundaries of anything. And the common opinion I found when I did my research is that, at least regarding writing, edge is usually the pieces in which the author wants to push those boundaries and make the reader rethink their beliefs, make them uncomfortable or even repulsed with the descriptions given. An example of this could be in certain series of movies where the character's death get drawn out and taking way too long screen time on the execution, making you shift in your seat and wondering when the hell the scene is going to end. Especially when the theme and story up till then was quicker, or with more off-screen violence, or just quick deaths from the enemies. When suddenly one death gets drawn out way more than usual, the death becomes a bit more impactful for the viewer, and thus pushing the boundaries of your viewer and creating a new edge. Now, edge in the current state has more to do with the description given earlier, where the meaning is more jokey and more memey. This will be the one we are going to focus on, but keep the previous info in mind. In pop culture and social media, edgy most of the time boils down to not liking the character if they use dark themes, which is now more of a buzzword than actually criticism of the character. But what exactly are dark themes? Well, dark themes are commonly themes we consider gritty and evil, the seedy underbelly of life itself. Things we don't want to associate ourselves with, but are a very real part of some lives. We talk about murder, torture, addictions, trauma, war, mental issues. You get the idea. These parts have been shown lots in the history of all kinds of media, actually. But how come these stories or scenes are not always seen as edgy? And for that we go back to the literal meanings, and specifically the opposite of the meaning. While the opposite of dark is pretty easily, it's light, the opposite of edge is a little bit harder. Perhaps soft is the best definition if we take a look at the current meme version of the word as the base. But to relate it a bit to Dungeons & Dragons, let's take a look at some instructions in the adventure book of The Curse of Strahd, a popular dark theme vampire adventure for D&D. In it describes the following. A tale that is perpetually dark in tone becomes tiresome very quickly. It needs to feature the occasional ray of light for contrast and create a sense of hope. Monsters and other terrors must be offset with creatures that are kinda lovable, giving the characters even more reason to stand against the darkness. To offset dark themes and settings, you need something to compensate, to not succumb your players or teammates to despair and depressed tensions. Bring humor, positive character traits, bring happiness, and the darker themes will be more impactful and more tense. And here is where I think Edge goes wrong most of the time. A lot of times, the edgy character is rotten to the core and no redeeming character traits, in the sense that there's no light in their personality. If your character or NPC only wants one thing that is dark in nature, like the classic revenge plot, your character won't pop out if they don't have anything to offset this. And we can see this in lots of different media. People are shown to have a softer side, often to relate more to the viewer or the listener or the player. Music with dark, heavy lyrics sometimes have lighter beats to offset this, which leads to people not realizing how dark actually the song is. People try to, for example, redeem an antagonist in a movie because they can relate to the struggles they went through. If you show the light in someone, others are more inclined to believe the character and not dismiss it and throw them away as an edgy character. There is also a pattern in that Edge most of the times gives the consumer a hard time to connect with the character. Not being able to actually relate to a character is the death of that person as a sympathetic individual and turns them really quick into an edgy character. The relatability of a character works two ways though. The light and the dark they were given. If you can't relate to the bright, elevating threats and experiences someone goes through, you also can't redeem the character all that well. If you can't relate to the dark experiences someone goes through, they become edgy, because it doesn't feel like it makes any sense. This also comes due to giving too much unnecessary dark information that serves no function whatsoever except to make a scene even more dark than needed. As a reminder, a lot of words with too in front of it are kinda bad. Too dumb, too smart, but also too light and too dark. Let's go back to the two stories we made at the beginning of the movie. In the first story, a lot of details are given that could pump up the darkness, but also some are hidden and revealed in the second version. The fact that the assassin murders someone but still wants to say something should make us curious about what would they say. Did they know each other? Were they friends or more than that? Or was it just something broody and a throwaway attempt to make it edgy and dark? In the second version, we get needlessly dark details that do nothing but alienate us from the assassin. We only get more details about a setting that does nothing but lessen the mood. Murderer does unnecessary things like twirling his knife, and suddenly the knife is serrated just to inflict more gore and blood. Skulker suddenly does this due to a blood vow he suddenly took while we have no idea what it is, and except it just sounds unpleasant. And last but not least, the character does something so dumb to leave the scene, like laugh manically, that we can't relate at all to this character. If I would use this NPC in one of my D&D campaigns, he would be instantly labeled as the Edgelord, while actually it's just the same character from the first version. However, I know some people will say, but wait a minute, I thought the first version was also edgy. Take that, YouTuber. And to that I would say, yes, very true, you're right. There's a very real possibility you also didn't relate to that at all. And this is where we come to perhaps the most important part of using edge in your characters or defining characters as edge. Everyone has a different level of relatability. Some people have a lower tolerance to dark themes and quickly condemn a character. Some people can't relate to the character experiences they go through. The moment a character does something in an encounter to which you can say, well, that doesn't make any sense, you will start to lose interest in that character and can in due time call them edgy due to just behaving over the edge of what you can relate to. For example, I've had a character once I played in a campaign that screamed out in emotional pain and woeful wails as a way of coping with some in-game struggles. I thought it made sense. I've been there and know how it feels, and a scream it is. Afterwards, I talked with my friends at the table, and they said to me that they found it edgy and found it weird and strange way of playing like that. And it's also perfectly fine. and a perfectly viable way to think about it. Everyone deals with everything differently, and if you can't relate to emotional pain, which is a darker theme, with screaming and sorrow, you can call it edgy and be perfectly fine with it. The beauty of it is that you can't define something as 100% edge. There are always people who think it makes sense, or where those edgy actions the others can contempt are just and fair. There are extreme cases, of course, but in general, there are always people who can somewhat see the point of view of some hideous activities. So to summarize, dark themes differ from edgy themes in the amount of light you compensate with it. Too little light and it becomes edgy really quick. Secondly, too much details give too much opportunities to lose a consumer and dismiss a dark theme as edgy. Thirdly, dark themes become edgy if the consumer can't relate to the actions. And at last, edgy is not a hard border, but differs for everyone. So now we know what the differences are, but how can we actually use this at our tables? And as a DM, you need to know the differences between dark and edgy. It's also very important to match it with your tone and style of DMing, the themes you play in, and what is believable to the setting. You can make your villains do outlandishly dark things as long as it makes sense to the players and makes sense in the setting. So what I would advise for others who want to try out dark acts and sessions and arcs is to use these pointers to guide you towards a story of tragedy and dread. Make that every single moment a scene for dark activities, leave some details up in the air if they aren't necessary to progress the story, and make sure what happens is in some way relatable to either your players or your characters. The last one is especially important, and the easiest way to do this is to actually know your players and set expectations, the classic session 0. If you are with friends, you probably have some idea what they can handle. If you don't, use this to your advantage to actually explore this in your session 0. Don't hit your party with, for example, body horror if you know that they don't vibe with those things. And most importantly, use tact if you know some subjects are touchy. In short, don't be an asshole. Now for players, it's a bit different to make a dark character or a character, because you act in a party and you only play one character, and most of all don't know what the DM has in store for you, or nor do you know what the other players has in store for you. Playing an edgy character can actually ruin a campaign, or even worse, friendships. Therefore you need to be really careful with what kind of dark themes you want to import in the game. However, using the tip to compensate dark with light themes is easily doable as a player. Let your characters have some things they enjoy to do in their spare time with your party or alone. Let them have some fun off time together. Let them fumble if they roll badly or have a natural 1 on something they should be good at. These moments can really help your character grow into the party and lowers the risk of them being unenjoyable and being thrown to the side. Again, try to figure out if the level of darkness you want to play in also matches with the kind of campaign you're in. If they don't vibe, if they don't match, maybe it's better if you just go somewhere else or do another kind of character. But to summarize, dark and edgy are quite related to each other, wherein the bad edge is like an extreme version of darkness, and in which unneeded details are given that only influence the amount of darkness but nothing really else. To prevent this, we can use light themes or influences to balance out the story or your character. If you DM, try to be attentive at this balance and avoid unnecessary details. The slider of darkness to edge is not a hard border and depends on the overall setting and the theme and the believability of the darkness. If you play a darker character, try to give them some redeeming qualities. Act on these, and if you sense a large difference between your fun and the fun of your party, adjust your darkness accordingly. Having a dark and tragic backstory doesn't mean your character is also an ass to play with. Hope you enjoyed the video. Leave something behind if you wish. Subscribe, like, comment. Hopefully this is the start of something new and fun. Have fun in your games, and I'll see you next time.